Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Welcome to today's Grey Market Blast, where the amazing Angie Setzer will provide you a rapid rundown of market news, pricing, and flows, and just genuinely just put in a smile on our faces. But before she does, I better get the legals out the way. So, as usual, nothing discussed on this Spaces session constitutes trading or investment advice or infers any kind of endorsement by PIQ Global Limited, Trades PIQ or PIQ Suite, or indeed the hosts, which, as you know, is the amazing Angie and me, Ryan.
Woohoo! Super amazing, Ryan.
Hey, happy
By the
Thursday.
way,
I feel like it's been Thursday or Friday like every day this week.
basically, yes, we have shoved a lot of stuff into a small amount of time, and I'm coming to you guys from a different area today. I'm in Iowa, so
Ooh.
if I sound off or lose service, it's my bad, but you're not going to miss anything. So we'll just call it a day if that happens. But welcome. Happy Thursday. Yes, it's been Thursday at least 70 times this week already, if not 80. And so I'm glad we've all made it here. Market-wise here, updates. Yesterday, we had thought we were going to get some sort of big announcement, right, on the USMCA and some of the tariff talk and things like that. And so far, all I was able to scrounge up was we said we were going to delay the implementation of tariffs on automakers for a month, right? Did I miss anything, Ryan, in that? Because I didn't see anything different here.
No, I'm on that page as well.
Yeah.
There's so many headlines. Perhaps we both missed it, but at the
Right?
moment,
It was a super big announcement that wasn't big at all, I guess, at
yeah,
this point. Now, I think we've kind of gathered, and this isn't a political statement. I said it the other day on Twitter where, we had this headline floating around where Zelensky and Trump are going to sign the mineral deal in a day. And I said, Trump will deny this in 60 minutes or less. It took 3 hours, but he did. And I think the same thing is the same, when it comes to these conversations that we have with some commerce secretaries and even treasury secretaries or whatever, like President Trump wants to be the one to announce the big news. And so I think we always have to be really careful that if it's not coming directly from his mouth, and even sometimes then, but if it's not coming directly from his mouth, we have to be careful to assume that it's the truth. And I think this is kind of one of those things. And I'm not even going to say it's not the truth. It's just, it might be delayed a day or two now because we ruined the big surprise on you. You know what I mean? Like one of those things where you
what
took my thunder.
this
And so, yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
you make a very, very good point because I half jokingly said to someone, funny enough, in a pub, which is very unlike me,
Right.
last week
Weird.
that you almost get the feeling that if someone under Trump announced something that Trump wanted to announce,
Yes.
there's every chance that he would come out and deny it and say that's wrong, only so he can actually
Yes.
say it's true himself the following week.
In a
Do you know
different
what I mean?
way, a little different. There's going to be
Exactly.
just enough tweak to where it's not plagiarism, right? Like you can
Yeah,
change just enough to where. So I think that's something that's super important to pay attention to. And on top of that, I think we learned in the last administration we get a lot of trial balloons, and so we'll get things that'll kind of be floated out, and we have to decide what that means or how it's going to affect the market. But I would say at this point in time, we will see some changes. I think you'll between all of the leaders working to discuss with one another the things that we have to do to roll things back and things like that. I do think you will see some changes and some further announcements here over the next few days. Just simply because things have become exceptionally chaotic, and we're waiting to see what that means. And so, yesterday we got those headlines. A lot of people, myself included, thought we'd see a pretty strong bounce back in grains, corn especially, because it's the one with the story. And we're just not. It's just not really doing anything at this point in time because we don't know what's going to happen with Mexico, our largest corn buyer. And we still don't know what's going to happen exactly with freight. And so that's the other thing that we're paying attention to is we did see, an announcement yesterday, and I am starting to see more details come out on that 18-point draft plan that President Trump is putting together, an executive order that's supposed to address all of these concerns over China and their presence in the maritime, the logistics and the shipbuilding and all of that. And so we're waiting to see on that as well because we have that million and a half dollars sort of port fee concern hanging over our heads. We did see export sales this morning, though, for corn up at the higher end of expectations, around 900,000 metric ton, which surprised me. I had thought we would see another week of disappointing sales potentially just with all of the uncertainty. But I think, one of the things that we can say in the global cash, corn market at the very least, like there's no offers in Brazil. Argentina is really hard to kind of scrounge up some corn here over the next couple of months or so. And so even with all of the uncertainty regarding trade and things like that, corn exports are probably going to continue on reasonably decent argument just simply because the US is the only game in town here for
Right.
now. Last bullet point kind of what we're paying attention to is going to be a continuation of the peace talks amongst Russia, Ukraine, the US, the EU. I did find it interesting, and you can kind of speak on this far more educated than I can. Germany
Steady on.
is working on a $580 billion stimulus
Yeah.
package. Is that correct? That's
Yeah, yeah,
huge,
it's up
right?
there. Yeah, and also from obviously, you got to kind of read between the lines on a lot of this stuff. And also, pardon my French, but I'm a big fan of the saying when it comes to China stimulus, all fart, no poop.
Oh,
Because
100%. We haven't seen the bazooka yet, if
yeah,
you
they
will.
do talk a good game, but it'd be
Hmm.
interesting to see how much comes through. But to give them credit this time, it seems to be a lot more structured. And interestingly, they seem to be looking towards, I've seen quite a bit actually focused on like rural agriculture as well. They really want to kind of increase their kind of, well, bring their agricultural kind of
Yes. And that's been something
industry.
they've been working on. But I
Yeah,
think it's the only sort of tool that they can use where they're like, that's what gets everyone worked up, right? If China reduces their agricultural imports, that's the thing that's been in the headlines for the last year and a
yeah,
half, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever you want to say. And so China knows that that is their leg to stand on. And so my last point, kind of, and maybe this is my last point, like it's your what is it when they my encore point. I already had three. I'm coming back with a fourth one because the audience
more.
requested, right? Yeah, but I mean the thing that we have to pay attention to, or the thing that we're watching right now, is that the Chinese commerce minister came out and has said, hey, I've been trying to get these negotiations underway. I've been trying to work with
Yeah,
the Trump administration on this. And so I've read some really interesting analysis on why the Trump administration is not engaging with China currently. And so it kind of gave me a little bit of an, oh, okay, that makes a little sense from the art of the deal standpoint,
yeah,
in the sense that they want to basically isolate China, put all of these bilateral trade deals together, or work on these bilateral or multilateral with USMCA. But even though we're still kind of targeting bilaterally, they want to get all of these sort of deals worked out with everyone else and then turn to China
yeah,
and say, okay, it's your turn. And
yeah,
China really doesn't have the ability to get into this big sort of trade war now with the US in the way that they did before. They're trying to
yeah,
bring back their economy. They're still kind of on the cusp of what could be considered a pretty major depression or collapse
yeah,
in their economy going forward. They've got to get consumer sentiment stabilized. And when 40% of your economy relies on manufacturing and exports and things like that, it gets difficult to do. So we'll just continue to watch and see, how Trump is working on the negotiations with China. But I do want to really kind of reiterate that the tariffs on Chinese agricultural imports at this point, when it comes specifically to corn, soybeans, and wheat, they're not a corn and wheat issue. China was not going to import corn or wheat from the US
right.
as far as the trade was
Yeah.
concerned.
So
Now,
it makes a good headline, but when you look into the
yes,
bones, of it, there's not really much
there's
there.
not really much. And to be completely honest, on the soybean side of things, yes, there's about 40 million bushels that you could say that are open, 60 million, I think, on the high end. They did buy a couple 100,000 metric tons more today in the export sales number. But there's really not a lot that you could see come out from a
Yeah,
cancellation standpoint from China either at this point in time. And our friend Eduardo from AgriInvest likes to point out that, it's the Chinese government that basically has the ownership of these beans that are on the books, for reserve purchases and things like that.
right.
Private crushers haven't been buying U.S. beans for January forward for a handful of weeks, if not months now. And so it's not the private crusher that's going to cancel these purchases from the U.S. It would be the Chinese government. And maybe they do, but it's not a huge needle mover, if you will, if they were to.
Right.
So, from an overall standpoint, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of concern. In agricultural commodities, I always say, you basically will see uncertainty is bearish 90% of the time
Yeah,
in eggs. The only time we've seen uncertainty really be bullish was after the Ukraine invasion, and a handful of other times throughout my career. But for the most part, you don't buy what you don't know. You sell what
yeah,
you have and you move to the sidelines. And so that's kind of what we're seeing at this point in time. And so we just got to wait it out, see what happens. But from an overall standpoint, from a balance sheet moving sort of scenario at this point in time, there hasn't been anything that's changed the balance sheet in an exceptional way. It's just the cloudiness of the future. And so we'll see if we get any more news that helps kind of take those away.
yeah. I'm sure we will. I'm sure, like, it feels like every day there's at least a couple of nuggets of headline risk dropping in. Just one thing to note as well, because obviously you make a really good point about, you know, China likes to talk a good game, and I see people on Twitter and random other places saying that China's coming back, China's coming back. There's not real physical evidence that that's happening. Yes, their economic data seems to be improving in places, but one thing you've got to remember with China is that we all know that their economic data, their government data is all fabricated. We know
They
this.
like to cherry pick or adjust accordingly.
Yeah, as I was saying the other day on one of the morning podcasts we do, it's easy to always hit your targets when you're marking your own homework in pencil.
Yes.
So they came out yesterday, I believe it was, said they're looking for a 5% GDP this year. Of course they're going to hit it because they're marking it themselves.
Right. Yeah, they're the ones that are judging their paper, and it's phenomenal.
If I was allowed to mark my own homework at school, I'd get far better grades.
That's same. And so I think that is a very important point. I do think the sentiment in China is shifting. I think the leadership is changing, some of their approach to how they want to address the economy and some of these things. But yeah, at this point in time, they don't really have the power. Yeah, a couple months of good economic data is fine and all, but I mean, we were basically on the cusp of a collapse here at the start of September before they started jawboning the markets higher and talking stimulus and all of these other things. And so I think that's super important to pay attention to. And I think that's part of why we aren't going to get much in the way of answers over how Trump wants to address phase 1 or phase 2 or whatever. At this point, I think he's just not. And I mean, to be completely honest, I'm telling my guys with corn to do the same thing to buyers. Like, you just don't answer the phone. We don't talk to him right now. We don't need to. We don't need to do anything. You just don't answer the phone. And so I guess it is a part of negotiation, right? Like, we're just not corn? We don't even know what that is at this point. You want some? Cool. It's going to cost you. And so I think it's the same sort of scenario that we've got going on right now. And so it's disappointing that we didn't get an answer on Monday, like tariffs are rolled back and China is this and that and the other thing. But I'm just going to go ahead and like I said, well, every day is another day we get maybe a piece of clarity. And so eventually the noise will start to not affect the markets as much. We'll pay attention more in the way of production weather and some of these other things. We have a USDA report next week. There'll be a handful of stuff that'll start to take the focus. But for now, it's all trade all the time. And any sort of headlines or updates or whatever, will be market moving. And so we'll see what today brings.
Exactly that. And as always, that's why people have got to tune in and listen to you tell us exactly what's going on. And as always,
exactly is a stretch, but we'll say it's a relative term.
Yeah, you bring the stuff, you bring the good stuff, and I am eternally grateful, and I'm sure many of our listeners are as well. Well, I'm going to say all of our listeners are. And speaking of which, our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in as always, especially our regular listeners. As always, we really appreciate you, and we'll hear more from Angie tomorrow.
I'll be back in Michigan tomorrow. Yeah, and it'll be Friday, the 27th Friday of the week. Yep, exactly. All right. Well, on that note, I think we need to stop. You have a good one, everyone, and we'll be back tomorrow.